please slow down.
Yes.
Period.
The answer is if you don't know what they're looking to get out of that meeting, how do you know how you're going to be successful?
It's pre-sales, not please sales. The 6 habits of a highly effective sales engineer. Here they are. I'm scraping all the bits off the bottom of the pan, the good stuff from my sauce.
It's all the stuff you put into your gravy, right? All the giblets, the drippings, all the good stuff.
So simple, but so f***ing effective, right? Such a simple thing, little thing.
From the Demo Stack Studios in Scottsdale, Arizona, this is Go to Market This Week.
All right, welcome to another episode of Go to Market This Week. Really excited to have in studio, not just a colleague in the pre-sale space, but a friend, Chris White. Thanks for joining us today in Scottsdale, my friend.
Nick, it is such a pleasure to be here, to see the studio set up. Amazing. Good to see you in person again. Thanks for having me.
So let's start with this t-shirt. It's pre-sales, not please sales. I love this shirt. What's this all about, Chris?
So, I think a lot of us in pre-sales, particularly when we first get into the role, I think we have this attitude like we're here just to serve our sales counterparts. And frankly, I think a lot of AEs tend to think that my pre-sales is just here to do what I tell him or her to do. Not that we're not here to please our sales counterparts, not that we're, not here to be good partners with our sales counterparts. But, at the end of the day, there's more to it than just making our sales counterparts happy and just pleasing them. So it's a little bit of a play on words, and it's intended to elevate the pre-sales profession.
Well, that's a great hashtag, and I hope you registered it or trademarked it.
I did indeed, actually. It is actually a registered trademark. It's pending, but it's actually a registered trademark. And if I can make just the smallest little plug, I do have shirts available on techsalesadvisors.com. So if you want to get yourself a copy, I don't know if you can get the Demo Stack hat.
You cannot.
But you can get this shirt if you care to do so.
So that's been determined by people above me that this hat is not available in blue to anyone else except for me. So that's it. That's the only option.
Noted.
So Chris, you are from Tech Sales Advisors, but let's dig into what is pre-sales? Tell me exactly, you got 15 seconds. I'm going to time you. What is pre-sales?
The pre-sales role, we are technical experts that work with our sales team counterpart to help demonstrate product, answer technical questions, and help customers become convinced that our solution is the right solution.
Okay, I like that. You want about 18 seconds, but I'll give it to you.
Yeah, I need to work on my elevator pitch.
Is pre-sales the right term?
There's been a lot of debate about this recently. I'm okay with the term, and here's why. The genesis of the term was, I'm going to say at least 20 years, dating back 20 years ago, when there was a very defined post-sales consultant role and pre-sales consultant role. And though there were a lot of consultants that did both. And when we're in a pre-sales role, in other words, before they're actually a customer, there are certain things that we need to, as I like to say, certain things we need to say, show, and do in order to help achieve the technical victory and help the team close the deal. And then once they become a customer, then there's certain things that we can do maybe a little bit differently. So I'm still okay with the term pre-sales, although, it's interesting. I recently heard infinity sales because particularly in the SaaS world, we're always selling, right? Particularly in the subscription software world, right? We're always working to keep our customers. So that's a term that I like. But personally, I'm okay with the term pre-sales.
So you tell me you don't like churn?
We don't want churn. We don't want churn. By the way, look, I read an article recently. The biggest or the most important growth strategy is customer success, right? So we're always retaining and working to retain our customers.
You live in the demo space. We've talked a lot over the last 8 months since we've got to know each other about discovery, about storytelling, but I want to talk about like the actual demo today. What goes into the thought process of a demo? How do you democratize your demo so that it's not just your sales engineers who have the option to actually show product? Because we're living in this product-led growth world where people want to see product and they want to see it fast. And I don't think, if I'm a buyer, that is a big ask. Do you agree or disagree?
No, I completely agree. And, it's interesting, Nick. I was thinking about this talk today. And one of the thoughts that I had is I think it's worthwhile to define for our audience, for your audience, what we mean when we say demo.
Okay.
What are we actually talking about?
Okay, tell me, Chris.
Because I think there's different things, right? There's the event. There's the demo event where I, as a pre-sales professional, or we as a sales team, sit down and present a solution to our customers. Then there's the asset itself, the thing we're going to show. Yep. And then there's also the script or the story or the message or the plan, right? That's also part of the demo. So one of the things that I'm starting to encourage more and more people that I talk to is, we sort of use the term demo very broadly. We need to make sure that we're being very specific and prescriptive when we're talking about the demo. So as you ask your questions, and as we talk about this, I might try to be as explicit as possible. What version or what part of the definition of demo are we actually talking about?
Got it. Joined now by Carrie Sokolsky, also from Pre-Sales Mastery. It's like there was intention here. Carrie, thanks for joining us today. I think you know this guy, Chris White.
Pleasure to have your acquaintance today, guys. It's always fun to see you. I'm sorry I'm not in the studio with you. You guys have a much cooler background than I do, and I'm clearly not rocking the demo stack and Chris branded blue. I love the shirt, by the way.
It's a good-looking shirt.
Carrie, it's good to hear. Good to hear your voice, my friend. But by the way, also 2 Canadians in the room, so I feel like I'm sort of the guy out on this one at the moment.
I'm very Americanized.
Yes, you are.
And I'm dual, so I figure I can morph across the border. It's all good.
So, Carrie, we're talking about demos, and Nick's been throwing a couple of, curveballs at me. And a moment ago, we were talking about tempo and sort of tone of voice. We've been talking about making it conversational. When you reflect on some of the demo coaching that you do, what would you say is one of the more common mistakes that you see people make when giving demos?
Well, how much time do we have for this?
Let me put it. We'll play the game. What's the first thing that comes to mind when I ask that question?
It's first person language. Where too many SEs or account execs, whoever it is, talk about, well, you can see what I'm doing over here, and when I click on this, or if I have a challenge around this, then I can use this tool to solve my problem here. And it makes the demo about you as the presenter, the seller, not about the audience. And it's just much more easy for people psychologically to connect with what you're talking about and what you're showing if you make them the star of the demo. And so while you can use awesome tools like DemoStack to change the names of the users that are on screen to reflect your audience, you should absolutely be modifying your language to be using second person language to say, when you struggle with this, here's how you would solve it with our tool. Because it makes people feel like they are able to do it as well, not just someone that's showing them can show them how to do it.
So simple, but so f***ing effective, right? Such a simple thing, little thing.
It's amazing, actually. And look, I mean, Carrie and I work together a lot, and we think a lot alike. Literally before today's show, I was writing some notes down, and one of the things that I wrote down is if I had to narrow down 4 things that everyone going into every demo should be thinking to themselves, or like a little 4 spot checklist, which we're not going to get. We don't have to do all 4 right now, but one of the 4 was: is this about me or is it about them? Right. Is it about us or is it about them? In most cases, we plan demos more about us than them. So 100% agree.
Yeah, I'll throw one other interesting element out there is I ask everyone when I coach a demo, I ask them 5 questions ahead of time. So I have a little bit of context to understand what's going on, because I'm not part of the sales cycle. I need a little bit of context of where they are in the sales cycle, what's happened, etc. And the first 2 questions I ask are what was the vendor you represent, what was your objective for this meeting or this demo, and what was the prospect's objective for the meeting. And it is fascinating to me how many people can't answer number 2.
Well, that's interesting. So how do you dig into that, Carrie? What is that answer?
The answer is if you don't know what they're looking to get out of that meeting, how do you know how you're going to be successful? And so, we talk that everybody should always be engaging in pre-demo discovery and understanding as much as they can ahead of time. That can't always happen for lots of different reasons, or it doesn't always happen adequately. And so don't ever be afraid to turn the first 5-10 minutes, whatever's needed of your demo, into discovery if you don't know what you need to know going into that call.
But when does it become, is there ever a point, Chris and I were talking earlier, that you're kind of always doing discovery? Does that ever become annoying? Like, can you ask too many questions, Carrie?
Yeah, I think it's a give and a get. I think it's also cultural. Like, I can tell you, if you're selling in Germany and you start with discovery, you're going to get a bunch of crickets, right? They want a reason why they should tell you something before they're going to give you something.
Interesting.
And that's an interesting, just sort of unique cultural thing. I apologize to the Germans I'm misrepresenting here, but that's, in my experience, that's been a generalized truth. I think that you have to be careful that you're not replicating questions that have already been asked. That's the easiest way to turn someone off, is if you ask them something that they've heard beforehand. Now, that being said, what I like to do a lot is frame up what we already know and then validate that with the audience. So here's what we heard from X person, because when we think about most discovery calls, they're with limited audiences, 1, maybe 2 people, and buying committees are huge. Average size, Gartner's studies keep going up every year, 14, 20 people, whatever it is. There's more people in that demo. Chances are the people that were in the pre-demo discovery didn't go out and ask everybody on that buying committee what their unique perspectives and needs and objectives were. And so by throwing up a here's what we heard and a current situation slide or the equivalent, that gives you the opportunity then to elaborate and say, okay, great, for the other 4 people in the room who weren't in that prior discussion, what resonates about this with you, and B, what are we missing? What are you particularly struggling with? What are your particular challenges? What are you looking to get out of today's meeting?
The current situation slide. I love that.
Well, and we've talked about this a lot before, Carrie. I mean, I like to call it the here's what we understand, or here's what we understood slide, right? And to your point, particularly if I've walked into demos, back in the day when I was in the field, and they had 10 major initiatives or major things that they were trying to achieve. That's a lot to cover in any sales engagement, much less a demo. So I'd say, folks, first of all, is there anything not on the list that should be? And secondly, what are the top 2 or 3 things? What 2 or 3 items rise to the top as most important? Because we have limited time today, and we want to make sure this is an effective use of your time. By the way, another thing, and I'll say this often: if we're not sure that they agreed to a meeting, let's just open with, how can we make the next 30 minutes the most effective and productive for you folks? Right?
Yeah, that's easy.
Yeah.
Carrie, what's the most important thing when you're landing the plane? What do the last 3 to 4 minutes of a meeting look like, other than, let's say, what's next steps? What's the best way to put a bow on what you hope has been a good demo?
To me, it's reiterating and recapping and reinforcing the key points you want them to walk out of that meeting with. We are delivering a fire hose to the face to all of our prospects for an hour or 45 minutes or whatever it is. They can't possibly remember all of it. In fact, I think the last study I saw was most people cannot remember more than 7 to 10 things in any given session. So no one's probably remembering anything that I'm talking about here, because you guys have probably covered well more than 7 to 10. Okay. Point being is you want to make sure that what they do remember is what you feel is most important to them. And is key stuff. The other challenge is it's not just us that's feeding them from the fire hose. They're presumably, unless it's a single sourced type of compete, they're likely looking at lots of other vendors. And so how do we be memorable? And so to me, it's no matter what you do, before you hand control of that meeting back to your account exec as an SE, you've got to reiterate, here's what we cover today. We talked about how we can help you solve X, Y, and Z and do this and that. And it's got to relate to exactly how you're solving their problems. It can't just be we showed you features and functions. The same way we don't talk about features and functions during the demo. Summary is the same thing. How are we solving your problems? That's what they're going to leave the meeting with top of mind. Right?
What's
People
the last?
remember more of what we hear at the beginning and the very end.
Okay, Chris, what's the last 30 seconds?
Did you see how our solution can help you achieve blank? Could you see using our solution in your environment?
Okay. Yes, I can. Carrie, what's your follow-up?
My follow-up to that would be, is there anything that you can think of that would prevent you from moving forward, given that you feel that we can meet your needs?
No, I did not see what I needed. What's your answer to that, Carrie?
Great. Can I send over a contract tomorrow? No, probably not. To me, it's an interesting thing because, Chris brings up a really interesting point here I think is important to bring out, which is psychologically, when we think about most competes, it's not what happens in that meeting that ultimately determines who the selected vendor is. It's how the vendors are then evaluated after the fact. So when we think about like proof of concepts, there's usually a scorecard that they're filling out, and they're going to go after each one of those meetings, fill out, did they achieve X? Did they do X? Did they do it fully, partially, not at all? And they're going to compare each of the different vendors against that scorecard. When you can get people, to Chris's point, to verbally give you confirmation that you've addressed each of those needs, it's much harder psychologically for them to then score you negatively on their scorecards after the fact.
Yeah.
So you never lose for the unvocalized objection.
So there's a couple thoughts that I want to sort of add to this conversation. And you, Nick, you took me to the last 30 seconds, but I'm actually going to go to the last 10 minutes. This happens, if not in every single demo, in virtually every single demo. And that is what? We'd run out of time
Right.
to demonstrate all of our prepared material. And what do most people do?
Rush through it.
They rush through the last. By the way, they may have prepared, and I hope they didn't prepare 8 things, but let's say for argument's sake, they prepared 5 key things to demonstrate in the context of, let's call it, a 1-hour meeting, the first 20 of which was taken up with some introductions and an overview from the AE, right? They get through 2, which means there's still 3 things. So it's taken them 30 minutes to get through 2 of their 5. They have 10 minutes left. They rush through the last 3. See, leaves no time, A, for questions, B, for them to really understand, and you didn't do any of it justice. This is what I tell all the people I work with. When you see that there's 10 minutes left and you've just completed 2 of 5, pause right there and say, folks, there were a number of things. There were still a few really important things that we were hoping to show. We're getting near the end of the meeting. I'm wondering if it's in our best interest, rather than rushing through it. Do you have any questions about what you've seen, or any questions about anything you haven't seen before I invite my sales, Matt or Bob or Sally to sort of close out the conversation and potentially talk about next steps, so that maybe we can revisit some of those things that we didn't cover? Like, to me, like, that is just, it's the easiest thing to do. We get that wrong. So let's make sure we do that. I'll pause there because I had one more thought, but I'll let either of you
just
bounce.
just drop the thought now, Chris. We're this far in. Tell me.
So the other question you asked, which was a good one, was last 30 seconds. What's the last thing we say? And I responded with, do you see, or did you see, or was it clear how our solution helps you achieve blank or helps you address blank? Here's the thing, though. If I haven't asked that at least a few times throughout the demonstration, it's probably too late to ask that question. I call it the mini close. Throughout our demo, and earlier you said something about seeking feedback. We do need to be seeking feedback from our audience. Does this resonate? Do you follow what I did? What I just clicked on is a significant part of the solution. Did you follow what I did there? But then we need to ask questions that are looking for a little. I'm not asking you to sign on the dotted line. I'm just looking for a little bit of acknowledgement that yes, right? Do you see now how this solution is going to address this thing that we talked about early on, right? In the this is what we heard slide. Now, what are we likely to get? You might get a yes, like you did, Nick. You might get a yes, probably not. You might get a flat no, right? You might get I don't know, we haven't seen it. More than likely, you're going to get well, we've seen a little bit, but we still haven't seen blank. Or I'm still not sure how we do or does blank. Now they're telling you what their objections are. They're telling you what their uncertainties are and what we need to do to achieve the technical victory. So I just wanted to emphasize there, like we can't wait till the very end to ask that question. It's too late.
Appreciate you. We'll post this next week. See you, Carrie.
Carrie, see you.
Thanks, guys. Great to see you. Thanks for having me.
You work with a ton of pre-sales leaders at Tech Sales Advisors. I've been in on some of your workshops, which are incredible. You had me completely pulled in, which is very difficult to keep my attention for 8 hours over 2 days.
Very nice of you to say, sir.
Well, you did. That's a fact. That's a straight fact. What is the biggest stumbling block that most pre-sales leaders are dealing with when you walk in and you're there to advise them? As Tech Sales Advisors, what's the biggest obstacle that most of them are dealing with?
Wow, that's a wide open question.
It is. You see what I did there? I gave you lots of ways to go with it.
You did. And if we're going to focus on sort of the demo today, I think one of the mistakes that a lot of leaders make, ironically enough, it's a similar mistake that a lot of sales professionals make. We sort of assume certain things, right? We have a tendency as a pre-sales leader, we assume that you know certain things either about the product, or maybe we assume that you know how to handle certain situations with prospects and customers. We assume that you know how to collaborate with your sales counterparts. And so I think the piece of one of the first pieces of advice, Tech Sales Advisors, as you mentioned, is let's sit down and really look at, what are some of the assumptions that we're making, and what are we doing to address those assumptions and fill those gaps. So have you effectively taken an assessment of your team? And do you know how they're performing in the field? And once we can start to make that assessment, then we can fill the gap. Is it, we talked about, is it a demo asset problem? Is it a knowledge problem? Is it a skills problem? And then we can begin to put some sort of plan in place to fill those gaps. So I'll pause there, Nick. That's sort of the first thing that comes to mind.
So I love that. First thing I'll suggest is that when you assume, you make an ass out of you and me, right? So let's limit assumptions. But I think it's really interesting. You brought up a really good point. When, I used to consult, you consult every day. When you come in as a consultant, it's very easy when you're doing the same things every day to see the issues, right? The stuff that the leaders don't see themselves, but you walk in and it's very easy to pick up on and give early feedback and assessments. Would you agree with that?
I would.
But?
Well, no, not but. I think, look, Nick, you and I were walking on, Pier 49 in
San
Francisco.
Yep.
And you spent how many years on a boat selling jewelry?
10 years I lived at sea consistently.
So folks, you can't appreciate what I witnessed, but we were sort of nonchalantly walking down the pier. We were waiting for a few other colleagues to do a few things. And then Nick made like a beeline to this jewelry store, and just magically sort of was in his own element. Why? Because Nick, you've been around it. You've been in that space for so long. You know what you're looking at. You see things that almost nobody else can. And so I think for those of us who have been doing this a long time, look, I gave my first software demo as a pre-sales professional in 2005. That's 17 years ago. And frankly, I was a post-sales consultant for, about 15 years before then, and gave probably countless presentations, technical presentations before then. You just learn things, you pick things up. So yeah, I can sit through a demo and instantly start to pick up things where you could have asked a question there, or you didn't have to say it in that way. It just, once you've been doing it for a while, you see things.
And for the record, the jewelry brand we saw, the way we went into this jewelry store by chance, I think you were actually in it already. And I'm like, oh, there's a brand I used to represent duty free. And it was Cabana, Kabana, which is out of Albuquerque, New Mexico. Beautiful jewelry. And I got right back into my talk tracks of telling these stories. And I think probably the reason I did it was because you and I talked so much about storytelling. So I was demonstrating, here's how you tell a great story about this particular, because if you walk in and you're a guy, you don't really know jewelry, all the jewelry kind of looks the same. But how do I tell the story that's in this case?
Yeah.
Right.
Well, and to that point, talking a little bit more about the demos, was there ever a time where you stood on stage, maybe early in that part of your career, and didn't do a particularly good job talking about and presenting, right? So you learned through the school of hard knocks, and then you probably, you assessed how you did on stage, you identified the gaps and mistakes, you found a better way, and you started to practice your craft until you developed a flow, right? So to me, that's a big part of this. When we first get into this profession, or when you go to work for a new company, it takes some time. You got to get out in the field. You got to get some at bats. It takes some time to develop that rhythm. That's why many people know me for the 6 habits that I wrote about. That's why habit number 6 is to perfect our craft. Because after every demo, you're the man. After every demo, right, we need to assess what could we have done differently? Where could we have maybe been more precise with our message, et cetera?
And I love the 6 habits of a highly effective sales engineer. Here they are on a mouse pad, which I have here because it's so important to remember these. Chris, let's talk about, I'm going to paint a picture of a scenario. You're walking in now. You're not with Tech Sales Advisors. You're coming in as a new pre-sales leader to an organization that has a product. So the first thing we're going to look at is whether you build a demo environment or you buy something like DemoStack, where you can democratize your demo for everyone to have easy access to, which is great. But let's assume that we know what that is. What is the absolute next step you're looking at when you're thinking, okay, I've got a team of 10 sales engineers, I've got 100 AEs. What's the first thing you're starting to look at now that you're dropped in that seat?
Every demo has to emphasize the value of the solution, and the benefit of the solution. And we have to understand the problems that we're solving. So the first thing, before I'm looking at the demo environment and build versus, if I'm new to this organization or this situation, I want to understand what are the problems that we're solving, and what is not only the value of our solution, what is the unique value of our solution, what is the unique benefit of our solution, and then how do we best tell that story? How do we best present that in the context of a demo? And I'm actually working backwards from there.
Okay, that's great. So I need to tell a great story of the benefits of my product. Same page. How do you start that genesis? How do you start brewing that up? That here's the story that I think is going to resonate, because I haven't done a demo yet. I'm the brand new pre-sales leader. How do I actually start to understand how to craft that story that I'm hoping is going to resonate?
Yeah. Another term that's probably used too much is use case. But I think you start with what are the problems that we're solving, right? What is the value our solution has to offer? And then what are the specific use cases in which our solution sort of fits that scenario and delivers that value and solves those problems. And then and at some point we need to think through the mechanics of the demonstration, the mechanics of the flow or the script and you mentioned story. Stories, what are some of the elements of a good story, right? First of all, the hero has to be the customer or the persona that we're selling to. The hero can never be our solution.
Agreed.
We need to lead with the problem or the challenge or the outcome that most are trying to solve for.
So are you trying to dig into that pain point immediately? Is that one of the first things you're doing? So let me take this down a more specific path. The sales engineer has done a discovery call. So with one person, with your champion, let's say, now I've got 3 people from their side on that call. What are the first words coming out of my mouth after good morning?
You've probably heard me say this before, Nick, but I'm going to say it.
Say it again.
Say it again. We need to lead with the decision maker's whiteboard. Too many of us lead with our solution. And that's why many demos fall flat and are not particularly interesting. I've said this, you've heard me say this countless times. Most people don't care far as much about your product as they do what your product can do for them.
Agreed.
And how it can help them solve their problem. So to answer your question, what are the first words coming out of our mouths? It has to be either setting context and putting them in the driver's seat and or identifying or aligning with something that we know was on their, quote, the decision maker's whiteboard, right? Because you're struggling with blank or because you're trying to achieve blank, the truth is the only way to do that is allow me to demonstrate how our solution will get you there. For example, that's a very simple example.
It's a great example, but let's look at that now. What are you, as you're saying that, are you looking for a reaction in their eyes to make sure you're on the right track? Because the nuance is the devil's in the details, but it's the nuance. It's feeling the room.
So, I mean, you struck a chord with me on that one. A resounding yes.
Okay.
And it's interesting, Nick. Here you and I are actually sitting in a room together.
Yes.
The truth is that most of the people giving demos these days aren't sitting in the room with people. I mean, if we are, great. And by the way, we have to relearn some of those skills because we haven't been doing that as much, obviously, for the past 3 years. Most of us are doing this through the lens of a camera. And in that case, I do think we should be looking for what I call the lean-in moment. Okay. Right? Am I correct that what you're trying to ultimately at the end of the day, what you're trying to achieve is blank? And the reason it's been a challenge is because of this. And if you could find a solution that would give you this and this without giving this, is that a fair summary of where you are?
No.
Right? No. Wow. I mean, if that's the case, maybe we need to just take a half a step back because it sounds like maybe we've misinterpreted. So may I invite you to maybe elaborate on what it was that you were, trying to solve for and why is it that you're here? What is it that you're expecting from us?
Okay, I like that. Let's rewind, choose your own adventure. Now I'll say, yes, that is the issue that I'm trying to solve, Chris.
Right. And have you discovered that when you try to do this, these are the blockers or the challenges, but when you try to do this, these are the blockers, and doing nothing isn't a good because of this, right? So what am I doing now? I haven't even gotten to the demo yet. Right? Like we're creating some alignment, right? Now look, some people may not be patient with that. Right? Some people may just say, just get to the demo, which is fine. I get that. We can still do what I'm suggesting, right? And you've heard me use this term before. There's a couple of them. One is what I call discovery in disguise. So maybe we don't know too much. I'm going to show one thing. Well, allow me to introduce our solution in this way. Many of the organizations that use our solution struggle with this, and they're trying to achieve this. And we've enabled them to do this in this way. Click. Now, allow me to ask you, is that similar to some of the challenges you've had? Are you currently working with, are you currently struggling with or trying to achieve that? And if not, right? And so I've given them something, but now I'm using that to draw more out. I'll pause there, Nick.
So I think what we're talking about here is that you're really still doing discovery throughout the demo. Right, especially if you have new people on board. Is that what we're getting to here, Chris?
I mean, I don't think discovery ever ends. In fact, I mean, look, Nick, I actually think some of the best demos are demos and quote demos, and we're talking about the event, we're talking about the meeting, are those in which the customer actually talks more than the sales team,
Yes.
right? So generally speaking, we don't need to show them, not even generally speaking, we don't need to show them everything there is to know about the platform. We don't need to get too deep in the weeds. I mean, of course, there are times when we need to go deep, but going into any demo, we should have at least some sense of who they are and what they're trying to achieve. We should be asking ourselves, what are the key takeaways that we think they need to leave with? And let's just focus there. Let's just emphasize there. And it's always got to be a conversation.
Let's say I'm going through this 30 or 60-minute demo. How do I make sure, am I constantly going back to my decision maker to constantly get the feedback if we're on the right track? Where does this autonomy kind of come in, and now you can kind of flow a little bit better? What's your take?
Yeah. Let's say we've got a group of, let's say we've got 6 people in a meeting, whether it's online or in the room. And there's one very clear decision maker and maybe a handful of technical principals, people that he or she is probably looking to help him or her make the decision, and maybe a few other sort of key people, and maybe a few, so what I like to call uninvited guests. It just, they showed up because the Demo Stack folks, were in town to give a demo, right? One of the mistakes that we make is we always go to the decision maker, and every question is aimed at him or her, and it's almost as if we're delivering this presentation or demonstration to him or her and ignoring the other people in the room, right? What does that do? First of all, we're alienating the people that he or she is looking to help them make this decision.
Okay.
Number 2, it looks like we're just sort of placating to the decision maker. And now we begin to lose some authenticity, right? So I think, so that's one extreme. Now, what's the other extreme? We get a question from one of the technical principals, or even worse, somebody who's real, like the security admin, and we want to oh my goodness, let me tell you all about the security architecture. And we dive deep and we get into the technical weeds and the technical details. And meanwhile, the decision maker, the executive, is sitting there thinking, I mean, this is probably an important conversation to somebody, but this is not helping me understand how you're going to help me solve the problem that's on my whiteboard, right? We need to balance those two. And look, Nick, even in my professional career now, I tell people all the time, I have 2 jobs, right? I run sales training workshops and I sell sales training workshops. Right. And so I still have, quote, discovery conversations. I don't do demos anymore because I don't sell software, but I have a lot of presentations where I'm sort of presenting my message. And there was one about 2 years ago where I had the CRO in the room and about 6 of his SE leaders. And so I had to balance addressing his needs as the CRO, but also making sure that from a content perspective, that it was resonating with each of the SE leaders. And I have to say, Nick, near the end of the meeting, in fact, one of the SE leaders said, honestly, Chris, this was an example of the perfect demo, because you kept circling back to what the CRO cares about, but you actually brought all of us along for the ride and for the journey, and you kept sort of making, I kept looking to them for sort of that technical expertise, sort of connection, right? That's what we need to do. Long-winded answer, Nick, but I think that's the challenge.
I love your long-winded answers, Chris. Chris, let's talk about tempo through the actual demo. How do I know if I'm clicking through stuff too fast? I'm the engineer. I know the product. I'm click, 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 click. How do I know that I'm actually getting? Am I constantly looking for this feedback? Am I this needy, AE or sales engineer who's constantly looking for feedback? How do you balance that tempo?
And I'll do with you, Nick, that I even do during demos, which is to say, you've asked 3 or 4 questions in that one question. So I'm gonna try to unpack it as best as I can. You mentioned tempo. Mm-hmm. You mentioned, without using this word, am I coming across almost desperate or desperate for approval? Right. In addition to tempo, I'm going to use tone of voice, and I do this certainly when I was in the field. I did this in demos. I do this in workshops now. I think we need to use things like tempo, pauses, the tone of voice to not only to our benefit, but to the benefit of the audience. And
All pause there. Does that resonate with you?
bingo, right? And for the benefit of the meeting, one attitude that I had going into every demo, Nick, was regardless of whether or not, and by the way, I didn't start out my career thinking this way. It took me a while to get there. But I got to a point in my pre-sales career that I went into every meeting thinking this 60 minutes is going to be worth their time. Whether they're convinced about our solution or not, whether they decide to purchase our solution or not, I am going to make this worth their time, and they're gonna leave here at least glad that they sat through the meeting.
Okay.
And so how do we do that, right? We come in with something valuable to say, but we make it about them. And I do think it's also the experience. And I think you mentioned tempo. Sometimes there are times in a demo where we need to quickly, if I can use the term to be very specific, click through a few things because it's not worth spending a lot of time on that. And then there are other times that we need to slow ourselves down. In fact, I mean, one of the things, you've heard me say this before, we should be going into every demo with some reasonable idea of what our aha moments are. And what are the aha moments? They're those moments that when we click into something in the context of the demo, we're actually expecting a response or a positive reaction from the customer because it's something unique. It's something that specifically addresses something that they said they were looking for, or something that they were challenged, trying to deal with. And the mistake that we make is we click into it and then we just skip right on through and go to the next thing. Right?
So let's talk about that. These aha moments. We used to, when I was in the cruise business, we talk about reveals. I would build up to this really cool brand and then there it is.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
What's best practices for revealing this aha moment other than, raising your excitement level?
Yeah. By talking about the challenge, the problem, the reason this is difficult, and what people face if they don't have a better solution. And particularly if I can get some agreement before I click into it. Have you ever tried to do blank? Oh my gosh, yes. And have you found that is difficult? Yeah, it's really problem. If I may, allow me to show you how we have solved that problem. Click. Wow. That's unique. That's different.
Really important. And I'll tell you from years of selling a lot of product on cruise ships, a reveal is so critical to getting that excitement. I've been sitting here waiting for this reveal, right?
Yeah.
And I think, especially I talk to a lot of sales engineers who are deadpan, right? So working on your tempo and your pace and bringing some excitement, even if it feels awkward and uncomfortable, having that excitement ratcheted up so that they're engaged.
There's so many things I want to add to this, but there's one in particular I definitely want to add.
I'm here for it.
The next time you give your demo, folks, anybody out there who might be listening to this, please slow down.
Yes.
Period. We all have a tendency to speed up. And even when we think we're slowing down, usually we're not. And by the way, why do we tend to speed up? Well, first of all, we just get excited. You were just talking, right? Like, particularly if like a customer or a prospect asks a question and we can hit that ball out of the park. Like that's one of the, oh my goodness, let me show you. Click, 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 right? And meanwhile, the prospect's head is spinning. What's another reason that we speed up? Sometimes it's because we're nervous.
Right.
Sometimes it's because like, oh my gosh, like, please let me just get through this part of the demo and just pray that nobody asks me any questions. We just need to go at a slower pace. Like I said a moment ago, there are some times when like we may need to click through a few things swiftly to get to a key point. By the way, it's a good reason to use a product like DemoStack, so you don't have to do that at all. But if you're not and you have to do so, there are times to move through things swiftly. But there's just so much power in please slow down. At the end of the day, one of the things I love to say, you've heard me say this before, a confused mind always says no.
Yes.
And and they might like you, they might be reasonably impressed with your solution, but you lost them 15 minutes ago because you're going so fast. And if that's the case, like, we're not at the technical one.
There's something else as well. If you've ever, shopped for a new car, you suddenly see that car everywhere. And the reason is our subconscious mind sees everything, but only tells our conscious mind what our conscious mind wants to be important. So when you're shopping for a new car, you suddenly see that car everywhere. It's the same thing with talking with tempo and pace. If everything sounds the same the entire time, the problem is it doesn't sound important to the prospect. But if you play with tempo, sometimes you can talk a little bit quick, but sometimes you'll slow down. What happens is their now subconscious mind says, hey, you need to pay attention to this. You got to pay attention. This is important because we don't usually hear this pace.
Yeah.
Right? So it pulls them back in.
Well, can I add one more thing to that, Nick?
I love that you ask. I mean, you're the guest. You're the co-host today, Chris. You're running the show. It's your nickel.
But by the way, what I just did, by the way, is a good technique when giving a demo. Like before saying, by the way, let me show you another thing. Just ask, just say, incidentally, folks, might you be interested in seeing this? Or sure, we might be interested in that, right? Nonetheless, the point I was going to make, similar to tempo, and I mentioned tone of voice, is, and I was thinking about this even deeper. I know for me, and you know me, I'm a pretty energetic guy. I'm a pretty energetic speaker. I'm waving my hand. People think I'm Italian, even though I'm not. So when actually, I'm part Italian. My stomach is Italian. Other than that, I'm not Italian. But when I want to make a point, for me, if I quiet myself, that's different than normal. So people are so used to me being sort of loud and high strung. When I lower my voice, it's almost like, all right, now I'm saying something really important. But a moment ago, you said like if you're just more naturally quiet, and if you're more naturally, then maybe you need to do the opposite. Maybe you need to just bring your voice up once in a while to emphasize that important point, and then go back to sort of your standard, right? I think the more we can, and at the very least, you're more interesting to listen to. And at the very least, people are at least going to feel like it was worth their time to sit through the demo or the meeting.
Austin Stone, sales engineering manager from Routable. Austin, how you doing, pal?
Not too bad. Bright sunny day here in Seattle.
Well, that happens once in a blue moon.
So Austin, Nick and I have been talking about demos and some of the prep and mindset going into demos, some of the things that we need to do during demos to be effective and engaging. One of the things we haven't really talked about yet is what happens after the demo. What are some of the things that we as pre-sales professionals need to make sure we are doing to ultimately help the team get across the finish line?
Visuals for sure. I found that depending on like what software you're selling, whether it's the software itself, maybe it was a solution based on your software, right? People are bringing us, the pre-sales engineers, in because it was complicated and technical, which means everything you're talking about is likely complicated and technical to some degree.
Right.
Right? And as we all know, humans are visual creatures, and I call them glazed donuts, right? It's when you see someone's eyes glaze over, but they're nodding in agreement. That can happen very easily. So even if that does happen, bringing a visual in to wrap it all up and leave behind with them really helps them remember and like scrape that glaze off their eyeballs, right? They're like, oh yeah, Austin talked about this at 5 minutes because I brought that up as a key concern on the first call, so on and so forth.
Paint me a picture of that, Austin. What does the visual look like?
I'll give you an example from Routable at least. So we're talking about, in most cases, how Routable can remove manual steps from your payouts process, AP, right? So whether that's like our system automatically sending a remittance email that someone used to be doing manually, whether that's, you're going to use our API, right? You're already generating how much your sellers are selling month over month. You just plop that in here via our API, and you don't have to record it into your accounting software, for instance. All of that stuff is complicated and multi-step, right? Automation is a lot of people like to call it. So when you're essentially condensing many steps into a single step, having the process you were given, that is the client's original manual process, and then drawing them a flow chart that highlights where an automated step is, in which steps it removes, is incredibly, incredibly helpful to those on the other end, right? Because you don't know if someone's technical enough to understand the first part, the last part, what they really care about. You kind of want to encapsulate all the little bits into
Okay.
that flow chart you send at the end.
I'm scraping all the bits off the bottom of the pan, the good stuff from my sauce.
It's all the stuff you put into your gravy, right? All the giblets, the drippings, all the good stuff.
Okay, so we need a great visual. What else are you thinking, Austin?
Separate emails, depending on how technical your client is, right? I think you should send a business email, or the account executive should send a business email really highlighting the business use case and value with your visual. And then there should also be, in parallel, a technical communication that also highlights the more granular bits of the workflow. You can't always guarantee, if you talk to two people on a call, that they're both hearing the same things on the call. And sometimes you have to segment them out and really talk about what's important to each so that they're both crystal clear, and get them talking to each other to make sure their mutual understanding is the same, right? If they're getting the same graphic in two different versions of it just to make sure it's clear, you're eliminating a lot of variability and discrepancy that can happen.
What are some of the mistakes that we make, Austin? You know, when I think of an SE who's been brought in to do a demo's over, they think they've done a pretty good job. You know, maybe they've left a visual, maybe they've done an email, but what are some of the other mistakes that you've seen out there?
What irks you when one of your sales engineers does X, Austin? What makes you crazy?
Yeah, so my big thing, and I've been harping on this lately, is during the demo and during the presentation, asking questions to validate that the pain point the client brought up the first time is actually a need, not a want. And in asking those questions, forming the questions without your assumptions in the question itself, right? A yes answer doesn't help us, but an objection and further detail from someone, like a help me understand or a why is that important question, really gets them to vocalize and reaffirm that their pain is a pain.
I need to tell you, Austin, Chris looks like he just smelled a beautiful bourbon. He looks so happy. It's like you lobbed him a softball.
I mean, I just love the way you phrased that, and it was a disruptive truth and maybe you didn't even recognize it. We need to form our questions without built-in assumptions, and there's just so much power, and of course, we need to be asking questions and seeking feedback. Nick and I have been talking about this, but asking them deeper, like, okay, I understand the problem, but what's the impact? Or may I ask what the impact of that is, right? To fess out, like, is this, to your point, is this really a problem? So yes, Nick is spot on. That resonated. That rung a bell with
I can
me,
see you
for sure.
salivating,
I mean, I've been taking notes, I think, the entire time, and I finally started taking notes. Well said.
Yeah, and like just to directly answer your question is when folks aren't doing that enough. Because if you haven't done that, you have nothing to call back to in your visual or in that communication afterwards. Otherwise, you're just sending along an email that's going to get grouped with the rest that they got, especially if you're in a competitive deal.
So after you send that technical email or technical visual, Austin, is that it? Is that where you drop off now as a pre-sales engineer?
Obviously, it varies, but I like to keep in contact and continually ask them questions to say, was this helpful? Is there more detail I can go into? Do you feel comfortable with our solution to X pain, right? Trying to draw out any little tidbit in a follow-up communication, right? Kind of like when you're playing cards, you don't want to show your whole hand and what you're really trying to go right up front. But if you can do one email at a time, it doesn't need to be more than 2 sentences. Hell, no one wants to read more than 2 sentences anyways.
Austin, what's the biggest challenge you have with your sales engineering team?
It's the asking questions without assumptions bit. I can't tell you how many times I go into Gong and see someone and they're asking good questions, but all the answers they're getting are yes.
So what what are you doing to encourage them? What guidance are you giving them to change the way they're asking questions so they get more than a yes or no answer? I'm leading the witness a little bit myself because I have an answer sort of in mind, but I'm very curious to hear what your answer is, Austin.
I question their answer in a comment in Gong, or maybe we're on a call and review it. Sometimes what I like to do is I like to take the Gong call and I'll play just the question someone asked and hit pause and say, okay, great. Are you going to just accept their yes answer? What else are you thinking about right now?
The first and foremost is we can never take just what they've said and sort of go nowhere with it, right? Even if it's a yes or no answer, we can always go somewhere with it, right? If I may, Austin, the one observation that I share with the folks that I work with is pay attention to the word that your question begins with. If the question begins with is, are, will, should, would, do, etc., those questions can be answered with a yes or no. If the question begins with who, what, how, why, where, or when, none of those questions can be answered with a yes or no.
That needs to be on a fucking t-shirt.
So let's start there. So anyway, and it'll be interesting if you pay very close attention to the actual the words in the question themselves. Like, let's not give them an answer, or let's not give our audience even the opportunity to give us a yes or no. Does that resonate, Austin?
It reminds me a lot of my physics teacher when I was in school. I have a degree in physics, not in computer science or everything else. And there's a mathematical problem solving technique for explaining things that happen in a series or that happen over time, for example. And he always said that when you're having a hard time figuring those problems out, to remember that always use the right tool for the job. The right tool for the job is always a hammer, and any tool can be used as a hammer. And I apply that to discovery and curiosity and question asking. It's like, no one's expecting to have a conversation with Socrates when they bring a sales engineer on the call, right? So if you're running out of things to ask why. Yeah. Just ask why. Why is the hammer question?
Yeah, I love that. And I'll add even one caveat to that. The I don't, danger's too strong of a word, but the caution about asking the why is that, given the context, why can sometimes feel a tad accusatory, right? Like, well, why did you do it that way, right? Like,
why'd you fuck it up?
Right. But if we preface, all we have to do is preface the question with, may I ask? Now I'm asking permission to ask the question. While I'm asking the question, may I ask why it is you did it that way? Right? It's totally disarming. So anyway, just again.
Austin Stone from Routable, appreciate you joining us today, pal.
Not a problem. Thanks for having me on. Great to meet you.
Tell me something you learned from Austin.
Well, I loved, is it learn or just sort of rephrase? I love this idea that the truth is that sometimes we do form our questions with assumptions baked in. And look, I'm in favor of, quote, leading the witness at times, quote unquote. But I think sometimes we can go overboard with that, and we do bake assumptions into our questions, and we get sort of I don't know what the right word, sort of a loose answer or light answer. We're like, oh, well, there you go. That answers it, right? And then that sort of just builds on the assumptions that we're making, and we sort of get like, we like to say that our AEs get happy ears, we get happy technical ears, right? And so that was a really good takeaway for me is being aware of the assumptions that we're building into our questions.
Chris White from Tech Sales Advisors, author of, you say it, buddy, because I always mix up one of the words.
The 6 Habits of Highly Effective Sales Engineers.
See, I always say of a highly effective sales engineer. That's my problem. I need to read the book again. That's my problem. But get it on Amazon. #1 book in pre-sales. One of the top books for discovery. Really great book. Go ahead, go buy it on Amazon. Chris, appreciate you.
Happy to be here, Nick.
Let's
Thank
go have
you, sir.
lunch. Hey, if
Let's
you're
do
coming
it.
to Phoenix, come see me in the studio. I'll take you to lunch.